The state of New Mexico and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency have launched a new task force to investigate and prosecute environmental crimes in the state. Now, they can range from things like dumping oil or hazardous waste to falsifying records. Now, these acts pollute the state's air and water and put people's health at risk. They're punishable by fines and even jail time, but too often they go undetected or unprosecuted. The new task force has its work cut out for it. Our Land's Laura Paskus talks this week with New Mexico Environment Department Secretary James Kenney and the EPA's special agent in charge of the Criminal Investigation Unit, Kim Boehne.
Secretary Kenney, Kim Boehne, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
So the Environmental Crimes Task Force, this is something new for New Mexico. Why do we need this?
Great to be here, Laura, and good question. The Environmental Crimes Task Force fills a big void in the state of New Mexico. Historically, most states' environmental agencies work with federal partners to prosecute civil and criminal violations, those that maybe, for the viewers, are unintentional and those that are intentional. With the lack of having a task force here for so many years, we have no barometer as to whether there are criminal activities occurring that would be hurting the environment, hurting public health, operating outside of the regulatory scheme. The task force will fill that void and share intelligence and then move towards prosecuting those individuals or corporations that are criminally violating environmental laws.
So can you describe for me, what's the difference between when we're talking about the environment, like a civil versus a criminal violation? Is this just like a crime versus an accident? What does that mean?
Yeah, so I wouldn't think of it as a crime versus an accident, because sometimes when an employer doesn't put the necessary resources behind compliance, you can have an accident. And that could be an intentional means to either make money or avoid the regulatory scheme. So I would think of it a little bit more, and this is just a general rule of thumb, that when a company or person inadvertently violates the law, they may have, the best intention, but they don't execute it properly. That is often a civil violation. Maybe they forgot to submit a piece of paper that is important to the Environment Department assuring compliance, or they forgot to do some other activity. A criminal violation, usually there's intent. There's intent to circumvent, defraud, avoid, and not play by the rules. And therefore, a criminal violation, in my opinion, is more egregious, and which is why there's typically not only penalties but sometimes jail time involved.
Okay. Kim, can you give us some examples of either cases you've worked on or incidents you've seen in the region that maybe could happen in New Mexico as well?
Certainly. I think the one thing that most environmental crimes have in common is that there is a deliberate decision, usually to save money or to make money, and it's at the expense of the environment or human health. So release of chemicals or other hazardous pollutants into the air. Perhaps an industry is falsifying their air emission. Or it can be anything from illegal importation of refrigerants and pesticides. We're seeing quite a bit of that. You would know by usually the label would be in a different language. There's supposed to be an EPA verbiage on pesticide products. Situations where there's fires or explosions because of mismanagement of chemicals, dumping into waters, either state or federal waters or sewer systems that would ultimately cause harm to our wastewater treatment plants, and then falsification at wastewater treatment plants, drinking water plants. So those are just a number of things that come to mind.
Yeah, so environmental enforcement is already a challenge in New Mexico, and thinking, for example, of how many oil and gas wells there are versus how many inspectors there are. How is this task force going to meet the challenges that could potentially be really big?
Yeah, again, a good question, because there is a bit of a David versus Goliath kind of feel from a regulatory standpoint versus some bad actors. Like, how do you find those? And part of the reason an environmental crimes task force works so well is because you leverage state and federal law enforcement agencies as well as tribal agencies to come together both on the investigation, building the case, then working with prosecutors to enforce against that entity. So the sharing of information actually is synergistic and allows you to expand your resource base. So if you think about it, where New Mexico Environment Department may have a hazardous waste inspector out in the field looking at a facility who's managing hazardous waste, if they see something that maybe isn't within their jurisdiction or just doesn't appear proper, they will bring that information back and elevate it back through the task force. So there's more eyes and ears out there and more sharing of information, and that does help level the playing field between the regulated community and the regulators.
So we're talking about protecting the environment. This task force also has an interest in environmental justice. Is that right? What's the environmental justice component here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can speak to this not only as a cabinet secretary, but also from my experience when I was with the Environmental Protection Agency. Oftentimes when you're going into communities to investigate environmental crimes, you're going into those that are socioeconomically challenged because you'll see, there's a term fence line communities, and those residents that are closest to the industrial activity are often the ones the most impacted. So there's very much an inequity when these crimes occur in those communities because they're already socially economically depressed. And that's where the task force will spend some time looking at that. It's an important aspect of leveling the playing field. Like, the most vulnerable should not be the most polluted.
So I realize that you are not lawyers, but I've always wondered, like, why a company, which is profit-driven, can come in and contaminate groundwater that might have impacts on people for generations, or can, say, contaminate groundwater to the point where entire businesses or industries are decimated. Why is it that environmental crimes and things like that aren't often taken as seriously in our society as even something like property theft against an individual?
It's a good question. That's why I'm in my job, to ensure that there is a level playing field and we prevent those, right? I don't think it's success when we're putting more money into cleanup. I think it's kind of admitting failure. And we should be working to prevent those types of situations from happening. The Environment Department, through most of its programs, has the ability to deny permits to bad actors. We're looking into that more, and we're utilizing those provisions in ways we haven't in the past. That is, a philosophy of New Mexico should be racing to the top, not attracting the lowest common denominator. But I think that's why you need enforcement programs. That's why you have to be out there and ensuring that compliance is occurring day to day, week to week, month to month. And when you're not out there checking, that's when some of those problems that can happen or that occur can really leave long-lasting impacts on our environment, as you're pointing out. So I don't know that I have the answer to your question directly, but bringing more resources to the investigation side that will hopefully prevent bad actors from becoming worse actors, polluting more of our groundwater, our land, and our air, is exactly what this task force will be designed to do.
So if people see something, how do they alert the task force?
So EPA has a tip line. The database that they would enter it in is called echo. But if they just Googled EPA environmental complaint, it should come up right away. That's then funneled to our headquarters and goes to the appropriate office nationwide. And then that would be something ultimately, even if we're deciding that EPA is more in the lead, we are typically coordinating with New Mexico ED to make sure that they're not already on it, one, and two, they usually have a better understanding of the regulatory history there and what's happened in the past, which always funnels into our case moving forward.
And similar, New Mexico Environment Department has a tip line. You can submit it either by phone or by web in English or Spanish.
All right. Well, thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.